Hey guys, it is CGB here. It's me, CGB, doing something I enjoy doing. Might be able to do more in the future, just tease you a little, but doing a bit of a get hyped video for the final rounds of our tournaments. They are coming to an end. Everybody's probably a little exhausted with the format now, but I think the tournament's done a good job of shaking out the pretenders and all the interesting brews of the format and what's really working out. And Amonkhet's going to be in another month or so, so about the time we wrap this up, we'll be ready to get right back into battles with new cards. But here we are, and let's start with Fight Club, because that one's a little bit further along. The Showdown had to add an extra round because so many people joined, and anywhere where you have the bigger tournament, you kind of get the more proven results. An extra round also separates some of the pretenders from the real deals. And what I say about that is not you personally, duelers, are pretending. I'm saying decks sometimes look better than they are, or seem better than they are, and especially in duels, where all that you really have to judge is how you do on ladder. And the tournament environment's a lot different, especially with published deck lists. And it's just not the same as the ladder. That's kind of the way it goes. But let's get right into it. So, into the top 8, we're actually almost to the top 4, but let's look at the top 8 from Fight Club. We got me, yay, that's vehicles. We got DCG, that's vehicles. Unbeatable, that's vehicles. Secret, I believe this is, yes, Boros, Valor, and Akros. We got Vert. He's running a Grixis stuff comes out of the graveyard emerge deck. Resh is running Grixis Thopters, so a pair of Grixis buddies. So just really quick before we go to the last match, Boros, 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 Grixis, Grixis. Then Mobius is black-white tokens, and Ninja is red-green aggro. So what makes up the top 8? We've got 3 of the vehicle decks. I believe there were 5 or so in the field. There's stats on this. Let's go over here and check out these stats. So going into the field, we had 18% in the Mardu camp. Is that right? Or yeah, 18% in Mardu vehicles. Blue also had some Boros vehicles. So, and the numbers there, but then you get to the top 8, right? So 5 Mardu vehicles, 3 of them made top 8 in Xbox Fight Club. That's a really good conversion rate. That is a sign of a pretty strong deck, increasing in share of top 8 percentage. And then the Boros deck obviously increased share too. There were actually 3 of those, but the one with Valor came to the top, which that's neat to see. Grixis had 4. Half of those made the top 8, and they make up 25% of the top 8. So Grixis doing all right. Orzhov, just if I'm looking at that right, it's just the 1 that made it in, snuck in, and the red-green I think is the same rule. Yeah. So. And we'll see this theme when we get into Showdown too, is that we got vehicles, we know that's good, and then we have a bunch of interesting little brews that deal with vehicles. Now we'll look at the matchups. This one, most of these are already played, so we know where things are going. I played my match with DCG, vehicles on vehicles, who cares, right? It's either way, vehicles wins. I was fortunate to take that one 2-1. Unbeatable played Secret. This was an interesting match to watch back. I usually think that Secret is highly favored if he's on the play, and game 1 was pretty spectacular in that Secret got the curve. Everything was going really well, and then he flooded out. He dropped his Valor. He had a big Valor attack, and then he just couldn't draw anything to trigger the Valor for turn after turn. It was excruciating, and yet still somehow in the last moment found a way. But then Unbeatable, of course, rolling back. Another interesting match to watch, and if you don't like spoilers, I'm sorry. I'm just going to spoil everything that's in the books as of today, Monday. And Unbeatable takes that down, moves on to the semifinals. Divivert, or just Vert, sorry. I have to properly manage the Vert brand because I'm being conditioned by his brainwashing. And Resh They are playing tonight at 11:30, so this match hasn't happened yet, and definitely worth a look. The Vert/Batman deck, these two collaborated, I guess, ran the exact same 60, and Batman, not as much luck in Showdown. Vert making it here as the 3rd seed into the Elite 8, and now he has an interesting matchup. Like, this matchup is pretty nutty to me. So Resh is running Grixis Thopters. Let's go there first. And this Grixis Thopter deck it's pretty good. I wouldn't call it amazing, but it's pretty good. It definitely has some effect. Chief of the Foundry is sort of a forgotten card, but if this deck can get wide and starts and just pump some tokens, that's something that a vehicle deck isn't going to deal with very well. That's something that a control deck is going to have a hard time with because they probably don't have enough sweepers for all the Whirler Rogues, Pia Kieran's, Thopter Spy tokens, etc. So what I think this deck fears the most is just something that comes out a little too strong and it can't hit its 4th land on time. That's mainly what I see. It's got some over-the-top stuff like Obnixilis and Herald that seems a bit slow, and Jace, so it's got Planeswalker game on top of everything else. But it's an interesting deck. It feels very mid-rangey. If he gets his colors right, it's got a lot of powerful things going on. But that said, like, none of these threats in particular stand out to me as really good in the matchup he's going into, which is the Grixis Slugs, I believe they call it. Yeah, Grixis Slugs deck here. And the removal doesn't, of course, line up good with Prized Amalgam, Haunted Dead, things like that. Obviously, you can unlicense some of the emerged things, and that's okay, but Dark Intimations gets them back. Dark Intimations also going to actually do work in this match. I'm really skeptical of it in the deck for the most part. I don't love it. But here there are Planeswalkers to hit as long as he can keep the field clear of Thopter tokens. And to that end, we have Radiant Flames, and we have Yaheni's Expertise. So there are some sweepers to get the job done, and card draw to find them. The important thing going on is that Thopters has to put the pressure on, I think. I don't think Thopters wants to be the aggro, because a 3-color deck with these cards isn't going to easily curve 2, 3, 4 in threats, but I think it wants to. I think we've got to have a start in the vein of like Scrounger, preferably, but maybe a Copter, as that just gets fatally pushed and such. I believe that's over here, right? I thought I saw him playing Fatal Push. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Let me read again. Actually, Copter on turn 2 isn't that vulnerable. If he takes the turn off to unlicensed it, that's probably welcome, or to temper it. And I don't see Lightning Axe at all. So, actually, I think that turn 2 Copter is fine. So he needs to start out with one of these. He needs to move right into an Engineer or a Chief, and hopefully hit a 4-drop as well. There's nothing over here to remove a Spy Network. So if he gets a Spy Network out and just keeps a vehicle uncrewed so it doesn't get killed, that's probably good for him. Fatal Push is really only going to hit Jace easily. Otherwise, its targets are not good. He probably, if I were in his seat, maybe I sit on a Fatal Push and wait to take out a Haunted Dead token to get in for a Flying Lethal. But this match is cool. 2 Grixis decks, 2 very different Grixis decks. One will rise, one will fall. And this is going to be at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. I'll be staying up late for it. You should check it out too. Let's move along. And Mobius took on Ninja already. This was black-white tokens versus red-green energy. A pretty interesting match. Mobius clutches it though. It was just kind of all right. I didn't see any extreme blowouts happen, and I think that Mobius and the black-white token deck is kind of where it wants to be in a matchup like that. It would rather deal with red-green energy stuff than vehicles. It's got, like, Gifted Aetherborn is really good in that matchup if it lives. Eiley also has Death Touch. Carrier Thrill actually can gum the board up just fine. So it's easy to see how he wins that matchup. Lots of tokens. Just gum that ground up. Not a lot of evasion, not a ton of trample on Hanzo's side, and he got taken out. So the top four, we've got myself on vehicles, Unbeatable on vehicles. One Grixis deck is going to make it, and the black-white tokens deck will make it. As pairings are right now, it's me and Mobius. That matchup, black-white tokens versus vehicles, you can watch that. It was round 5 we played, and it was just all about the smooth curve draws, man. Both decks had powerful draws and strong things that they could do. Not a ton of back and forth. Usually somebody getting ahead and figuring out how to stay ahead and running as fast as they can. But the game 2 mulligan to 5 for Mobius shows what his deck can put together with the right draw. And a great way for me to get stomped if that happens again. It's a hard match to pick, and obviously I'm in it, so excuse me, conflict of interest. And on the other end, one of these two is going to play Unbeatable. How's the vehicle matchup? I think Thopters would like it more. I really like this Grixis deck. It baffles me. I'm no expert on it, and Vert would have a better idea of his own matchup than I would. And I'm sure he'll have no problem sounding off. I just look at the collection of cards here. If I had, I really would have felt better if Lightning Axe was in there, but it's not. Instead, we have Sweepers, Collective Defiance. I see Sorcery Speed Removal, and I see a handful of instants. So we're leaning on Fiery Tempers, and we're leaning on having to Madness them or cast them easily. We really need a Stitchwing or preferably a Haunted Dead in the yard to get that done sooner, or one of 2 unlicensed disintegrations. Otherwise, Scrap Heap Scroungers and Copters are just going to bash in with impunity. And he does need to take time to set things up, Cathartic Reunion, Oath of Jace. Those take away from while the opponent smashes face. And Unbeatable's deck is pretty good at smashing face. There's no question about that for me. I'm not 100% behind the card choices, but he's definitely all about getting the attacking going. He's got Kari Zev, he's got Carl, and he's got 2 Invigorated Rampages as sort of the go-over-the-top finishers. Thopter Engineer gives everything a little bit of haste to follow up if he does sweep the board. And Fleetwheel Cruiser, that's a real pain in the butt as well. He's if Vert wins his quarter, which is not a given, he still has to figure out how to deal with all this go wide and all this haste. And the go wide, he's got 4 Sweepers, but I don't know if that's good enough against all the go wide cards. 2 Cerams, an Angel of Invention, a Kiran Nalar, 3 Thopter Engineers. And it isn't a go-wide card, but it sort of is in Carl. Anyway, I think that's a pretty bad matchup for Vert. I really think that's a tough one. On the other hand, for Thopters, I think that the Thopters deck knows it has to beat vehicles. I think it came to beat vehicles. It can gum up the board. It can beat them a little bit at their own game. It has a good amount of removal that does plenty of work. It has a Planeswalker game that if things stall out, a Planeswalker can take over, and some Thopters can get in the way and protect it, and 3 Fatal Push. That's probably as good as you get against vehicles right now is 3 Fatal Push. It's one of the only screw target vehicle deck cards that you can run. He does only have 1 Harvester, but if it shows up, it shows up. I don't like the telling times, but you know me and telling time. I'll get off that particular soapbox. All right, so that's pretty much where the Fight Club's at. The way that the top 8 breaks down from here, it's hard for me to pick against myself, of course. Vehicles is a really good deck. I think I don't like my road. I think that Mobius and Resh have the best read on beating the vehicle metagame. And there are still 2 vehicle decks in and on either side of the bracket. So I think to be honest, vehicles has the raw power. I think these 2 have the best read of the meta. So one of these would probably be the pick if I were trying to be objective to take the whole thing down. But I'm not objective. I'm me, so I'm freaking going for it. Don't care. That's going to bring me to the end of the Fight Club discussion. Let me crack a beverage here as I'm talking myself till I'm right out of voice. Anything to take away particularly? Once again, a great conversion rate for vehicles. It took up a huge amount of the meta, and you see just about everything else was a brew. Vehicles versus the brews. The only blue there is Boros, which I believe one of them was a vehicle deck too. And there's not, unfortunately, there just isn't much else you can take out of the brews that rise and the brews that fall. We got some good players playing decks that they know and making it to the top. And that's about that. Pretty straightforward. But you can get a lot more out of larger tournaments, as much as I hate to say it, which means it's time to talk about the Steam Showdown. Now, I only hate to say it because I am an Xbox player, and some of you Showdown guys, some of you Steam guys get a little attitude with the Xbox players sometimes, but it's okay, I can take it. I see where it comes from. Y'all have a much bigger and more experienced player base, and the matchmaking is fantastic, so you play against other good players at the top all the time, which is a good way to get better. Those of us who are on Xbox trying to get and stay better, we have to frickin' work at it, and it's usually not from just playing on Xbox. We usually have paper Magic experience, or we played so much duels it's ridiculous, back when the matchmaking wasn't broken. But that's a whole other tangent. So let's see. Yonder makes these predictions. I agreed with his math, so I'm just going off the list that he wrote down here. And Yonder is definitely in there, dropping the 6-0. Bind in there. Torgan, Tainted, Nighthawk, Dead Roma, the winner of this match, which hasn't happened yet that I can tell, and either Jolly or the loser of the match. So everything broke pretty interesting. With 6 rounds, a lot of stuff happened, a lot of top 8 cut drama, which is really fun, and I wish I could have covered at the start of the round. But now that we're to this point, we just have to go off what happened. And let's go down the list of players and what they're playing and start there. So over here, Yonder is running green, or no, not green, black-blue mid-range, and Dimir mid-range. And this deck, his deck is pretty cool. I'm a fan. I liked it when I first saw it. I said it really just kind of had the right cards in the right places to surprise people, and I'm impressed that it did. Yonder's a long-time battler in Showdowns. I think he's been in all of them, and he's been around duels for a long time. Forum contributor. Good to see him doing well. Happy for him. A finalist in the past, I believe, with a Simic Tempo deck. That was pretty spicy. Back when people thought all you could do was ramp. Anyway, Walking Ballistas and Fatal Pushes and Gifted Etherborns and Kingpins, like all this lifelink in the 2 spot, one of the better ways to fight vehicles, because if they're tapping their creatures to crew things and fly over the top of you, there's not much you can do to stop the damage, but you can counter swing and gain some life to buy time, set yourself up. You also have Black, so Black has the best cheap removal for dealing with vehicles in general. Fatal Push, Grasp of Darkness, good stuff. And some of the interesting cards like Scrap Trawler, I've had a really good time with this card when I tested this. Like, I was actually surprised how much value you get off this guy in a deck with enough artifacts. And Filigrees also gain more life, buy more time. Harvesters gain more life, buy more time. The amount of life gain just built in is pretty crazy. And it gets him to the things that actually win games. Tezzeret's Touch is a ridiculously cheap but fast clock on just about any of these artifact things that you throw it on. It's pretty stellar, and I like it. I like where the head's at. And of course, up here we've got Sky Sovereign, which you can also get with an Inventor's Fair. Noxious Gearhulk, same thing. Big old Herald of Anguish. Just love this deck. I can see how it got up here. His road wasn't particularly easy, but he was equipped well for any kind of fellow mid-range or quite aggro-y competition. And as far as getting through control, you kind of turn into the vehicle deck you hate, and you just try to do the work with, like, Harvester. I guess he doesn't have that many vehicles, but Tezzeret's Touch is pseudo-vehicle-esque. Like, you tap one of your artifacts to crew it, sort of, to crew your 5/5. It actually is pretty close. It feels like a vehicle when you play it. So Yonder's up there with his Dimir deck. What else we got in this party? Oh, yeah. We got number 2 bind. It's just, my God, this deck. This deck is so crazy. I remember when I saw this, I just oops. So here we go. It's like the shortest deck list by far. I mean, look at everybody else with their mythics. So their deck list gets long, right? Look at it. It's like it just doesn't need mythics. Forget mythics. Overrated. It reminds me, and I'm not trying to take anything away from this accomplishment. I'm really not. I'm not trying to say I did it first. I'm just saying it. The experience I relate it to in my own life is the spirit deck I used when everybody was running the 4-color Planeswalker decks, and they just couldn't do anything about a bunch of 2/1 flyers. Watching Bind play this deck has been so much fun for me, and my God, this haymaker right here, Brawl's Expertise, showing how to work a vehicle matchup. Brawl's Expertise is an interesting card, and it feels like it definitely belongs in tempo. It's not a control card very much. If you've been working for turn after turn to keep their board clear, you usually can't find enough targets with it. It's also not always great in ramp decks or things of that nature. It just doesn't always line up, but it seemed like in this deck, it's just the hammer. You just drop the Baral's hammer on that vehicle player, and they're like, well, crap. Now that less people play Fleet Wheel Cruiser, it's even better. And also bounce. Cards that bounce other cards are really good against vehicles. It's a big tempo thing, because what's bad about vehicles is the tempo loss. If vehicles, you get an overpowered creature, but you have to tap another creature to use it. So that's positive tempo for the opponent when you tap that creature. Now if they bounce that vehicle, say that you had to cast the creature, and then you tapped the creature to crew the vehicle that you just cast, it means you already spent mana for the turn. So now you attack with the vehicle, you tap that, they bounce that vehicle, you likely can't recast it. What does that add up to? It means that next turn you have to cast your vehicle, and the turn after that you get to use it again. So bounce on a vehicle essentially buys you 2 turns without the vehicle being in your face. That's a lot different of a play pattern than and a lot more value than a 2-mana bounce spell can usually get. And I think that's where this deck absolutely picked up a lot of its just a lot of its value added that gave it an awesome record and let it play so many awesome games. And which makes it a threat moving into the top 8, and we'll see if its opponents can handle the bounce. Also, I mean, really, very miscreant. Skyship Plunderer, and I don't think you can do anything with this Plunderer other than make energy. It's just, I love it. It's just ridiculous. All right, got it. All right, I gotta move on. I could talk about that deck too much. Torgs. All right, Torgan. So this deck, Sultai Midrange. I couldn't be much more skeptical of one of these decks as I am of this one. The curve is so bad, yet here it is. It top-8'd and pretty convincingly against a variety of very aggressive opponents. So was I wrong, or is mana curve overrated? Can you run 3 cards that you can cast, 4 cards that you can cast before turn 3 and get away with it? From what I've seen in the games, this deck just makes it up with high impact, and Reclamation Sage was definitely an all-star. Spell Shrivel definitely doing work, kind of breaking up their curve. Murder just showing up, and it seemed like the answers were always in the right order. And then the Haymakers are, of course, spectacular in their fashion. So it's such a strange deck. The Shrivels actually and the Convolute did a lot more work than I would have expected them to do. I still would hate to be on the draw with this thing. I just see bad things happening. I'm still very skeptical. But if vehicle decks slow down, for example, if you jump over here, this one doesn't run Bomac Courier. It doesn't run Inventor's Apprentice. Like, those are the cards that come in really handy against a deck that's this slow. And if other decks are slowing down, like my own vehicle deck is slowing down, then they can be taken advantage of by a deck of this nature. Also, play around Bounding Crassus and Spell Shrivel at the same time is hard, but you can do it. I saw a lot of people just being like, I don't know what to do, so I'll just attack. Not always the right play. Anyway, moving on from that very interesting Sultai deck, we get into, so far, we're 3 decks in, probably top 3 seeds, no vehicles, right? Well, that party's over, and this one is bringing the cheap aggro. So we got Kithion, Toolcraft, Inventor's Apprentice to go with Karizev, Selfless Spirit, Scrap Heap, Scrounger, Veteran Motorist. That's a lot of cheap drops, and they're going to do a lot of work, even before we even play a vehicle. So that's going to be really fast, and if he gets... And I like the low to the ground so far. Everything that we've looked at, like the Dimir mid-range, is probably equipped to battle it, but you want to be low to the ground against the Flyers deck. You want to be low to ground against Sultai. From there, the 6 drops are, or the 3 drops, I'm sorry, are the 6 that you'd expect. No Thopter Engineer, that's where I came down with the deck. A lot of people dig the Engineer, but I think these just pack more power and just do more in the spots. The 3 Unlicensed and the 3 Harnessed are the same removal spells I like. The 2 Planeswalkers, 1 Nahiri. I'm always back and forth on whether or not to use Nahiri, but I don't hate the idea as much as I used to. And then probably the right 7 vehicles. No Heart of Kirin I don't agree with. It's just a really good card, even if not all your creatures can crew it, but he went for Karizev instead. Maybe he's right. And of course, there's actually a real big drop-off around the 7, 8, 9, 10 vehicle point where you just can't add more vehicles. I love Caravan in the 3-color version, so it's like you either take out a Harvester, which diminishes your energy plan, you don't take out a Copter, and you probably don't take out Skyship. It's just too much of a haymaker. But anyway, I think this is a good build, and I think it'll give some headaches, and I can see how this one got into top 8. But there's your first vehicle deck of the top 8. Next up, Nighthawk. My god. I don't need to see the deck list, trust me. I know this one, but I'm pulling it up. Here's another feel-good story. This is this guy's been, you know him. He's YouTube's Nighthawk. He's been making videos, he's been playing decks, he's been battling. He never did better than a 2-3, but here he is at 5-1 in the top 8. You can see right here, called his shot, future winner of Steam Showdown. And not vehicles, not vehicles, not vehicles. No vehicles, eh? But it's the most popular deck in the meta. Why would you not want to play it? Did you not metagame properly? Anyway, I gotta knock that off. But he, no, I don't think he quite meted properly. Nighthawk probably doesn't care about that too much, and mostly cares about playing decks that he finds interesting and enjoys, which he found in T-Merge. And the anti-vehicleness, this deck can beat vehicles. I played it and beat vehicles in Kaladesh tourney, but it's not easy, and it's really hard, and it requires the right draws. So hopefully we'll see some good draws. Hopefully he'll be able to do okay if he gets paired with vehicles, but it's a really tough matchup. It's rough. Anyway, if he gets paired against decks that are not vehicles, this deck is really good. So one thing we'll see when we get to stats is how much green-black based mid-range was in this Showdown, and so far we haven't seen much of it making top 8. And that's because this deck really loves matchups like green-black mid-range, anything mid-range. If you put a mid-range on it, this deck would probably enjoy that matchup. And if you put a control on it, this deck is probably favored in that matchup too. So everything but kind of pure aggro, this deck really likes. It's kind of the deck to beat the decks, the mid-range and control, that are made to beat the deck, which is Mardu vehicles. And hopefully Nighthawk, if his pairings go right, he'll be okay, but it's really going to depend on pairings. I don't like him against... he is, in my opinion, a complete dog against the vehicle deck we just talked about from Tainted. So that's... hopefully I'm not calling his shot for him right there. And let's do another here. Dead. What you got? Black-green Constrictor. So here's our first green-black deck in the making top 8. There were a number of these running around. What this deck does a little differently that I think is good is it goes for a little bit of the revolt mechanic so that it can have slightly better and slightly more flexible cards in the 2 and 3. It has a Greenwheel Liberator. This is just a huge upgrade from a Bandar, so he gets to cut 2 of his Bandars, which I think are easily some of the worst cards that get run in this deck. And then he gets to run Vengeful Rebel instead of having to run like a Grasp of Darkness. So he keeps his curve aggressive. You know, he doesn't have to. He keeps more creatures in the deck so he can stay on the aggro plan and crew his Smuggler's Copter a bit more. I also like that he's running Copter. I think a lot of decks just tried to move away from that and go all in on constricting things. I really didn't like that. Winding Constrictor is a very good card. With 3 of them, you just can't draw them, and if you do, you're hoping the opponent drew no removal. It's pretty bad. He even has 3 Blossoming Defense to protect it. So he hedged here. He hedged in several directions. The vehicles are a bit of a hedge. He's got Cruiser, Copter, and Harvester. And the Revolt mechanic stuff is a bit of a hedge, so that he's not absolutely reliant on Winding Constrictor to have bodies that are reasonable. I don't love Armorcraft Judge. I'm such an anti-fan of the Judge because I rarely see it do that much. Even if it's 4 mana, 3/3 creature, draw 2 cards, I don't think that's what you want in an aggro deck. So I'm not a fan, and I don't know. I haven't watched enough of his games to know if it did the good work and if I'm absolutely full of it. The Reclamation Sage is another hedge to kind of play a little more of a mid-range game instead of an aggro game. I don't know. I'd almost rather run removal or more threats. The deck feels pretty aggressive. I'm pretty surprised that they can't make room for the boat, you know, the flagship. That is something that, with a Blossoming Defense, I would be really thrilled to have in my deck. Also works pretty well with Vengeful Rebels that can crew it. I don't know. I'd probably want to get something like that in there. I think we're running Armorcraft instead of Kalitas, which is another... Ooh, I think I threw up in my mouth a little. But it is what it is. He top 8'd. He did the job. So my opinion can suck it. And like I said, I think I gave credit where it was due, though, as far as some of the choices being really good hedges against the things that weaken this type of deck, usually, which is an over-reliance on some kind of a curve with the Winding Constrictor. When he has it, he's doing great. When he doesn't have it, he has a vehicle game to fall back on. He has some Revolt cards with enablers. So, it's not... It could still do work. It could still do work. Now we get into the We're Not Sures, because there's a few matches still being played. Get some beverage here. And we've got... yeah, you know, it is. Usually I have music going. What am I doing with myself? Timeout, music break. I know, this is supposed to be a smooth, perfectly polished video, but too bads. I like to queue up my tunes. Anybody else use iTunes and notice it takes forever to do anything? What's up with that? Steve Jobs wouldn't have it, I tell you. Alright. Duels of the Planeswalkers. If anybody's wondering about this, which I would, if I were you, I'd wonder about this, but this is all the mixes from all the old Duels of the Planeswalkers. Somebody posted this on the NGA forums a long time ago, and I believe it can still be found. So let's rock and roll. Bring back some old school. This is the 2014 main theme, ladies and gentlemen. Doesn't it just take you back? Hopefully it balances okay with my vocals as I'm doing all this on the fly. We need some tense, like, get hyped music. All right. If you stayed this long without the music, it's only getting better. So we've got a match. It's Showdown and Gal. And Gal has a cool deck. It says 4-color Planeswalkers, which... the gag reflex hits right away when you read 4-color Planeswalkers. But it's not really 4-color Planeswalkers. It is and it isn't. It's control. It's classic Draw-Go-y control. Look at all this. Look at all this stuff. He even only runs 1 Radiant Flames and 2 Yahennis. He's not even sweeper control. He is draw, go, instant speed, action control until he starts dropping Planeswalkers. He's even got 3 Glimmers in there. And then he drops Planeswalkers, Disciple, Dark Intimations, rah! And basically, you could call this Light Grixis. You can call this Dark Jeskai. He's running the white, and he's got Blessed Alliance for it, which is a really good splash card. He's got Anguish Unmaking, which can take out any permanent, and that's really important. So that's a good thing to have, but most people would stop there. They'd splash a few white cards. This guy goes deeper. He says, I'm also running that Gideon, ladies and gents, and I'm also running that Avacyn. It's like, boom. Throw that Sorin on top. I mean, that's not a hard splash. I love that. I love that this deck he throws in Combustible Gear Hulk. That's just a riot to me. Like, why the heck not? Let's have another big finisher. I'd probably run Noxious Gear Hulk. I'd want some life gain. I'd want to kill a big thing. I'd want that menace. He's just like, nah. Combuster, go home, baby. Combuster, go home. And I dig it. All right. So what don't I like about the deck? I think it's trying to do too much. I've played a lot with these control decks. Decks that try to put the Planeswalker package with Dark Intimations together with the Glimmer package, with the Gear Hulk. And then on top of that, you have 4 colors. So I just think that what you're going to have happen if this deck does make top 8, which isn't guaranteed, I think you're going to be against the best of the best, the decks that curve out well, the decks that are well tuned, because that's how they got here. And I think you're going to have a hard time beating up decks that curve silky smooth. I think you just got it's just asking too much of this mana base. That's my opinion, but you know, sometimes perfect curves come out of 4-color decks. We've all seen it. It happens. And he only has to do it a few more times if he makes top 8. On the other side, he's got the challenge of the tournament right here, and this match should be really good. Hasn't happened yet, so hopefully we can catch it. I didn't see what time it is. Hopefully it's soon. And hopefully I can catch it. But basically you get the most 4-colory kind of last serious control deck standing in the format versus the gorilla in the room, the vehicle deck, played by Showdown. And this version has the Planeswalker package. It does still run Fleet Wheel Cruiser, which is really good against a deck with sweepers. And what else do we got? We have a pretty high vehicle count. We've got Harvester, Caravan, Cruiser, Skyship, and we have Copter and Heart. That is a lot of vehicles. So our opponent, like, if the 4-color Planeswalker deck can take or keep him off creatures, there may be just a lot of vehicles without a crew, because it's just not really coming together there as far as crew, man. There's only so much. But we got Depala, we got Pia, we got Thalia, usual suspects. We do have plenty of removal in Blessed Alliance, Harness Lightning, and Unlicensed. Yeah, this deck is, in my opinion, short on the creature aspect, and a bit slower than others. This could give the control deck an edge to get into top 8. Otherwise, it's a vehicle deck and a slightly slower version of a vehicle deck getting in there. The other person who might still make top 8 based on tiebreakers is Jolly. He's running a slightly slower vehicle deck. And a few standouts in it, like Eldrazi Displacer, things like that. Collective Defiance, a few different choices. And Angel of Invention, so it's going a little larger, a little slower. This is really good against other vehicle decks and other mid-range decks. Not so good if he runs into control decks. Not so good probably if he runs into Bind because of the tempo. That's pretty much a tempo deck. And probably not the worst thing that Nighthawk could encounter either if he sneaks into top 8, which is not a done deal. So what do we have here at the top of the standing? Let's hit that list. We got Blue Tempo. We've got Dimir Midrange. We've got Sultai. I think it's a control. He calls it midrange. It feels control-y to me, but maybe it's because of the counters. But he calls it Sultai midrange. And we've got vehicles. We've got Team Merge. We've got Green-Black midrange. And we have vehicles, or control. So not that much in the realm of vehicles. One vehicle deck for sure. Possibly two. Okay, so probably two for sure. That isn't as huge a percentage as one would have expected. If we go back and look at the stats and break it down, Mardu at 21%, 8 in the vehicle category, I would assume. So 8 vehicle decks, so making up 21% of the field. If 2 of them are in top 8, that's 25% of the field. So they did a little bit better than the field at large. They surpassed the field at large. Unfortunately, we can't take much from everything else because everything else is just so diverse. There's just too much going on here, right? If we look at black-green as a group, there were 5 of those. Only 1 made top 8. You could say that underperformed. I'd agree that it's not as good as people think, especially if we combine like all the constrictor strategies. So if we put like Jund in there too, if we toss in Jund, I think there's a few of those. Where is that? That's you right here. 2 Junds, and I think that those are constrictor decks. So then we're up to like 7. So then 1. So there's only 3 copies of constrictor that made the top 8 in 1 deck. I'd just say that it's a little too all-in, and I still feel that way. I've never quite found a build that like knocked my socks off with Constrictor. Fun deck, cool cards, but I can't call it top tier. How about Grixis? 6 of those, but again, a lot of varying strategy here, and I'd almost want to put I want to call it like Light Grixis or Dark Jeskai, the control deck that's kind of the last control deck standing, trying to make top 8. The name, Gal. I hate saying Gal, but that's the only way I can keep it in my head. So his deck feels like Grixis to me, but I think that Control and Grixis in general really underperformed here. It's one thing to answer a vehicle deck. You can do it. It takes a lot of work. It's another thing to answer a field with a lot of variety without skewing too heavily into beating the vehicle deck, which is where Control was left. Just a tough spot, and I don't think we have quite seen the Control deck that can take on all comers. If Gal's deck is the closest thing to that, then good, I suppose. One thing that is missing right now in the format in either top 8 or across top performers is Tower. We haven't seen a Dynavolt Tower deck rise from the ashes, and I'd still be interested to see that happen, you know. This Grixis Spells deck from Matt Too Far, it could look good at times, but I think he's got a lot of choices in here I just can't agree with. And he obviously only plays one way, and it's faces the place. All he does is go face with, like, everything. So I think that there is more to be done with Dynavolt Tower than got explored for this tournament. So I would love to see that in the future. Otherwise, the tension remains like Planeswalkers versus vehicles, right? I mean, can your Planeswalkers win when there are vehicles over there that are like can't be targeted by sorceries, flying, absurd power and toughness, you know, all this stuff going on. So anyway, that tension remains, I think, in the meta. As far as how the top 8 sits, who's got the best chance? You know, who can run the table? How do things look? Yonder is facing a varied group that isn't as aggressive. Bind, I think he's already had a match with Bind. He's okay there. And Tainted is another matchup I think he would welcome. But I don't really think that Yonder wants to... I think he would also be fine against Dead. But I don't like him against Torgan. I don't like him against Nighthawk. And I don't like him against the Control deck or the Jolly version of vehicles. I'm not really feeling that. And I think the Shaolin version may be tough for him too. It's hard to tell. I do think he's probably played the vehicle matchup, but the more mid-rangey it gets, the more Haymaker magic it becomes. Yonder proved that the Dimir deck can play Haymaker magic casting like Noxious Gearhulks and Heralds of Anguish and having boat battles, battle cruiser magic. But I still think that overall the Dimir cards are underpowered to these cards, as long as if like Jolly, I think for sure would know to embrace the mid-range of his deck and not just try to beat him and use removal spells on crap like Filigree Familiar, or you know, maybe you don't kill the 1/4 lifelinker at all, maybe you ignore it and just fly over it or overpower it. I don't know, I'd have to play that match more. But I think that Yonder is, I think his Dimir mid-range deck is very good, but I think it's got some bad matchups waiting for it. How about Bind? What does Bind not want to play? Like, please don't play against this. With that tempo deck, I think Bind would love to play... I don't think he wants to play Yonder. I think we've already seen that, and we know how that goes. But I think he would love this match. I think he's comfortable with vehicles, or else he wouldn't be here. I know he lost a recent round to vehicles, but I think he could... I think he'd be comfortable going right back at it. I think he'd take that matchup again. So I think, especially these two, either one of these mid-range vehicles, I think he would love to take that on. I think he'd be favored in that control match just because his curve would be so very smooth. It would be a lot of pressure. Disperse can be a real pain in the butt, even for Planeswalkers. And Green-Black, I think he wants that matchup. Nighthawk, I think he wants that matchup. I think his only problem is Yonder, which is really bizarre to say. Maybe he doesn't want to play Taint either. It's a more aggressive vehicle, so it can get under him. So Taint and Yonder being bad, tougher matchups, Bind is in, he's sitting pretty. Torgen, obviously, he doesn't want to play against Bind. He probably doesn't want to play against the super fast version of vehicles. And I don't think he wants any of Nighthawk. I think he'd be really happy to play Yonder. He'd be really happy to play Roma. He'd be really happy to play the slower vehicle decks. And he'd probably, the control matchup would be interesting, and I'm not sure who's favored there. In fact, I can barely come up with a way to rationalize who's favored, but that would be a very fun match should it occur. And yeah, Taint, the fast vehicle deck, we've already covered a lot of the matchups, but he'd love to also play Nighthawk. I think his worst matchups here are probably Yonder and Roma, the green-black deck with Reclamation Sages, Winding Constrictors. Just kind of the mid-range slog. Also, I doubt he wants to play Jolly or Shaylin, vehicle on vehicle. These vehicle decks are slower with more Planeswalkers and big cards. That does make them favored in the matchup. So, yeah. What does Roma want? He probably wants a quick vehicle deck. Does he want anything else? I doubt he wants any other deck in this top 8. So he's I would pick, he would be a true Cinderella story for me, just based on deck list alone. What I'm looking at is he's probably the dog of dogs. He's got the long odds. Put your money there for the big payoff. Then we've got these guys. How do they look for top 8? Well, we've already covered it if you reverse engineer what I did there. But Jolly and Shaylin have very similar decks. They don't want to play each other because who knows what that will do. But I think that they do want to play against Roma. I think they do want to play against Taint. I don't think they want none of Yonder and Bind. I think the Torgen matchup would be rough for them as well. And I think they'd take the control matchup, as that's just a slugfest, and I think you play this kind of deck knowing that it can go toe-to-toe with control, or else you wouldn't play it at all. It's just got tough threats to answer. And as far as our 4-color control deck, probably just wants to avoid Bind a lot, and probably Taint as well. The decks that are super aggro and can curve and just bash him in before he can establish. I think that those are his fears. While at the same time, if you're control and you like playing long games, I don't think you want to play Nighthawk. I mean, the guy goes up to Ulamog, and if you counter Ulamog, he can recur it. I don't think that he wants to play that match either. But, all right. So from that, can you pick who will win? I mean, I really think that Bind has some of the best positioning here in this top 8. that silly little blue deck that could, man. I think it's sitting kind of pretty. Obviously, there's a lot to go through. There's draws, there's draw, and there's play. Those things matter. And picking based on deck lists, you know my record. It's not that good. I don't get a lot of things right, but I do this for fun. And hopefully you guys find it interesting. But man, that deck looks pretty well positioned here. Yonder also, there's a road for him, but it's tougher than it was before. He just doesn't want none of this, I don't think. He doesn't want the Sultai deck, and he doesn't want the Nighthawk go over the top T-Merge deck at all, I don't think. Yep, I think the long money is still on Roma, like I said, and if Vehicles takes it, if Vehicles were to actually get there, I think it would be one of the mid-range ones, and they'd have to either beat Bind or have Bind fall ahead of time, because that's probably one of their toughest matchups. Same with Yonder. So I actually don't think the mid-range vehicle decks are sitting that pretty, because I think that Yonder and Bind, and maybe even Torgan, are ready for that. I think the very, very aggressive one from Taint then may have the best chance, but it has to dodge one of these or both of these. All right, interesting stuff. So what can we take away from Showdown and Fight Club put together now that we've got some competitive stats, some analysis? Well, I mean, the only real way to look at it is you look for overarching themes. There's not much control. There's not very much you can do with control. Nobody really found the mix for control that can deal with this meta, at least not in time for this tournament. And since these tournaments start pretty quick, that's not that shocking. I really would love to see how some Dynavolt lists, some blue-red Dynavolt lists would do, some well-tuned ones. But it doesn't look like they were ready in this for this, and control is in a rough spot. It still is. Mid-range is definitely where you want to be when aggro is your format, and aggro is plenty of the format. Most of the decks, also tempo is good on the aggros, against aggro as well, and it's pretty solid against mid-range. So we still see some tempo popping up, and we see some control slanted mid-range popping up. Vehicle decks that rose to the top, we see them slanting mid-range probably to beat other vehicles, or the extreme aggro version that gets under the decks that were slanted to beat the mid-range decks that were built to beat the vehicle decks. What can you learn from that? It's a meta call, man. If you think everybody's playing vehicles, you want to be mid-range. If you think everybody's playing mid-range to beat vehicles, then you either want to be extremely fast vehicles or you want to be slower ramp or mid-range or tempo. Maybe control if you can find the right mix, but I think the jury's still out on that mix. Tiers, deck tiers. It's really tough, right? But I think at this point you have to say that there is one tier 1 deck, and it is Mardu Vehicles. It's the only one that is just universally accepted as strong, good, powerful, can beat just about anything on the right draw. It's the only thing that put multiple copies into both top 8s. The only thing. And from there, it's just about building the format around that. I would say that Vehicles is tier 1. The other decks Brews are probably tier 1.5, tier 2 that are built to beat Vehicles well, and that's why they performed. And that's where the meta is. Will it change with Amonkhet? Dear God, we need some cards that just... Why didn't we get released the Gremlins? You know, something to super hedge this vehicle nonsense. But maybe those cards are coming in Amonkhet. Maybe they designed them and inserted them last minute. Who knows? I know they do the sets way ahead of time, but when Standard and Duels is this messy and repetitive, maybe they make some adjustments. How about this for a card? I've theory crafted a few totally hosed vehicle cards, but here's one for you. You know, 1 black, enchantment. Whenever a vehicle is crewed, exile the creature that crewed it. How about that? How about something I thought of like Contamination? It's like a green, 1 green and 2 other. It's an instant, and it says exile target vehicle and all creatures that crewed that vehicle. How about that? Let's put some of that. We've had enough of the vehicles. Let's hose them hard, and then maybe we'll have a different tournament scene next time. All right, that is gonna do it for my little get hyped as we go down the stretch here. Stay tuned to NGA as we find out when the tournament, when the games will be. Follow the participants on Twitch so you can see when they go live, and subscribe to their YouTube channels so you see when they post their results. All right, I'm CGB. I hope you enjoyed this little talkie video that I made, and I will see you around. I'm out of here.